Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most important modernist writers and the novel that's been considered by Times Magazine one of the 100 best English language novels. Of course, I'm talking about Virginia Woolf and her brilliant piece of art, Mrs. Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway, written in 1923, feels incredibly modern compared to other novels of the time. And I believe it has more to do with the subject of the book and the way Woolf deals with it rather than with the relative proximity of the events of the book to our time. Mrs. Dalloway, like many other Woolf's novels, deals with the matters of life and death. Quite literally. She asks her readers of what constitutes a meaningful life, and if there can even be one with such an inevitable end as death. The ease with which Woolf presents the subject is also rather remarkable. She doesn't try to sell any ideas that labor movement can save you from death or art and beauty can save you from death. Although in her other novel, To the Lighthouse, she does imply that art leads to immortality, but it's more the act of creation rather than the high meaning of art. In that sense, Woolf strikes a perfect balance that many other authors lack. It's the balance between expressing herself and writing the novel the way she seems fit and catering to her readers' needs. Now, let's take a look at some excerpts. The very beginning is already quite interesting. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself, for Lucy had her work cut out for her. The doors would be taken off their hinges, Rumpelmayer's men were coming, and then, thought Clarissa Dalloway, what a morning, fresh as if issued to children on a beach. Then she goes on to describing the weather, goes through her memories, and finally moves on to Peter, her friend and a former suitor. But they might be parted for hundreds of years, she and Peter. She never wrote a letter, and his were dry sticks. But suddenly it would come over her. If he were with me now, what would he say? It was the state of the world that interested him. Wagner, Pope's poetry, people's characters eternally, and the defects of her own soul. How he scolded her, how they argued. So the beauty of this extract is that it doesn't tell us anything. It poses more questions than it answers them. We start wondering, who's Clarissa Dalloway? Why does she need flowers? Who's this Peter guy she's thinking about? Are they in any sort of relationship? And most importantly, what's going on? What Woolf is doing here can be summarized as a mystery element. She gives us little pieces of characters' background to get us hooked on the story. Does it work? You tell me. I've personally read the novel in one go. In all honesty, though, the mystery element is one of the most common writing techniques. It is especially known in journalism or marketing. A good example would be all the clickbaity titles or descriptions used in media outlets or on social media. The most important aspect is that there is a certain element that's hidden from the reader's or watcher's view that prompts them to continue consuming your content. Another aspect of the mystery element is that it indicates a certain depth. If we get back to the introduction, then you can easily notice that there is no real introduction. We're just being thrown right into the daily business of the characters, which only makes them feel more real to us. Another differentiator of Woolf's writing style is how clearly subjective her characters' emotions are. We know that all emotions are subjective. We all experience different things based on our background, beliefs, and so on and so forth. However, when we read a book, or watch a movie for that matter, we usually go through the story together with the main character. We adopt their point of view, and that creates this illusion of objectivity. Woolf breaks this illusion by merging different points of view and letting us see that the same situation is, in fact, perceived differently depending on who's looking at it. We've been already introduced to Clarissa's perception of Peter. Now let's take a look at the emotional undertone of this perception. His letters were dry sticks. He was bitter. He never noticed a fine morning, however beautiful the day could be, or the trees, or the grass, or the little girl in pink. And further down, it is implied that he would look at things, but he would never notice their beauty. The way Clarissa thinks of Peter portrays him not as a poet, but rather as a rational and potentially even a cold-hearted person. The first time we're introduced to Peter and we see him speak, this impression is only confirmed. He does sound rational and logical, and he doesn't seem to care much about life's beauty or other people's feelings. But as the novel progresses and we get to see Peter's point of view, realize that he's in fact a rather sensitive person who's afraid of opening up. For example, closer to the end of the novel, when we see him talking to Sally, he goes like, "When one was young," said Peter, "one was too much excited to know people. Now that one was old, 52 to be precise." Sally was 55, in body she said, but her heart was like a girl's of 20. "Now that one was mature then," said Peter. "One could watch, one could understand, and one did not lose the power of feeling," he said. "No, that is true," said Sally. "She felt more deeply, more passionately every year." "It increased," he said. "Alas, perhaps, but one should be glad of it. It went on increasing in his experience." And further down, when Clarissa approaches him, "I will come," said Peter. But he sat on for a moment. "What is this terror? What is this ecstasy?" he thought to himself. "What is that fills me with extraordinary excitement?" "It is Clarissa," he said, for there she was. By getting access to both Clarissa's and Peter's point of views, we realize that maybe these two characters would have been happier with each other. But the beauty and the tragedy of it is that we know that the characters don't. There's this idea that it's better to show the internal world of your characters through their actions rather than through their thoughts. However, what we see in Mrs. Dalloway is that point of view can be just as powerful in conveying emotions and different points of view as long as you don't name these emotions. Woolf also uses point of view to get beyond the limits of a single day. It's rather interesting that the events of Mrs. Dalloway happen on a single day, and to be fair, there's not much happening at all apart from Clarissa's party and, spoiler alert, Septimus' suicide. But by switching between different points of views, we get access to past and present and future endeavors and assumptions about life and certain life beliefs and philosophies and whatnot. It is also interesting that Woolf uses different characters to introduce different topics or themes within the novel. For example, the first time we see Septimus, the switch between Clarissa's point of view and his is barely noticeable and is only triggered by the violent explosion of the car engine that reminds people on the street of the war sounds. So Mrs. Dalloway goes over different flowers, then she hears the sound of car engine, then they notice some important face. She goes over all the possibilities of who that can be, including some royal family members, and then we switch to Septimus. Septimus Warren Smith, aged about 30, pale-faced, bead-nosed, wearing brown shoes and a shabby coat, with hazel eyes which had that look of apprehension in them, which makes complete strangers apprehensive too. The world has raised its whip, where will it descend? Everything had come to a standstill. The throb of the motor engine sounded like a pulse irregularly drumming through an entire body. The sun became extraordinarily hot because the motor car had stopped outside Mulberry shop window. And this gradual drawing together of everything to one center before his eyes, as if some horror had come almost to the surface and was about to burst into flames, terrified him. So what we see here is, first of all, the subjectivity of emotions. Septimus is a war veteran, and of course the sound of a violent explosion, as Woolf describes it, terrifies him. It is also a very good example of the stream of consciousness. We see the same situation being evaluated twice, and each time the description, the assessment of it is very different. For Clarissa, it's mostly about curiosity. She wants to know who this famous person behind the curtains is. For Septimus, the sound reminds him of the horrors of the war. Now let's create some text. So, the best way to implement the methods we just discussed would be by introducing a conflict from different perspectives. Let's say our female character is a breadwinner in the family. She also does the majority of house chores, but whenever she asks her husband to help her with them, he fails to deliver on his promise. Naturally, she feels unsupported, unheard, unloved, you name it. And then our male character is going through some sort of an identity crisis. He's struggling professionally because his boss is an asshole and it's really hard to get anything done with him. He also realizes that he hasn't accomplished anything in life. He genuinely forgets about house chores because his mind is preoccupied with work-related worries. So our goal is to show, even though our characters' feelings for each other are still there, the misunderstanding that they're not aware of makes them estranged from each other. We start painting a scene by introducing the conflict through our female character's perspective. Simply because it allows us to present the conflict in full and it makes our characters sympathize with the protagonist. She notices that he didn't do the dishes, even though he promised to, and he had done something like that before. Then she starts reflecting on their past when they started dating. She remembers how thoughtful and caring he was back then. She starts comparing the time of their dating to the present moment, and she wonders whether their love is gone. And now we're switching to our male character, and there the picture is totally different. He's mostly thinking of his professional realization, or the lack of thereof. He's also reflecting on the fact that his relationship with his wife hasn't been the best lately. So when she starts nagging him about the dishes, of which he totally and genuinely forgot, he only feels that there must be something wrong with his love life. This way we can show that our characters can't connect with each other, they just can't find common ground. And the worst part, they're not even aware of it. This might be a very powerful tool when you need to show how tricky intimacy can be and how our personal assumptions can sneak in into every conflict and affect our perceptions of each other. Now, another thing we want to try is to implement a mystery element. As I mentioned earlier, this technique is used in many different texts of many different genres, especially in marketing and journalism, so don't feel limited, but this time we really want to try and use it in a fictional text. Let's say we're continuing our story and now we're writing an introduction for it. We want to hint at the fact that our characters are going to divorce and our female protagonist, maybe she is the main character, she tries to hide the fact of divorce from her inner circle, namely her family, her siblings, her friends, but she can't. We're also not gonna state the true reason of this divorce, which is lack of understanding, but once again, we're gonna try and hint at it so we can captivate our readers and keep them engaged. So we start in our story by stating that she knew they would find out, she could never keep secrets, even as a kid, and it was her worst weakness, and so on and so forth. And we will try and describe a little bit these feelings of shame and guilt she's feeling because of being a disappointment to her family. So that's how you can implement all these methods into your own writing style. As you probably noticed, it's getting super dark here, which means that I should probably finish this video right now. I hope you found this short analysis useful and you're going to implement some of these techniques into your own writing style. I wish you a happy and productive writing/creative session, and as always, I'll see you next time, and bye bye.